folks, and welcome to Typology, the show in which we explore the story of you through the lens of the Enneagram. My name is Anthony Skinner, producer of the show. Hey, thrilled to have you here with us today. So many fun things going on. Ian's got a brand new book, of course, The Story of You, that's up for pre-sale right now. To find out more about that, you can go to ianmorgancron.com/thestoryofyou. And you can even order it for pre-sale there and get a bunch of goodies for doing so. And also something that you have been asking for a while now, and that is an introductory course into the Enneagram. Well, Ian is releasing a brand new introductory course to the Enneagram this year. It's called Discovering You, an Introduction to the Enneagram. And this course is for anyone who wants to understand the Enneagram and themselves better. It's also a really great way for you to share with your family and friends who aren't interested in reading a book. With this course, you get a complete overview of the Enneagram and the different personality types it contains, so you can better identify which one you might be and what that means for your personal and spiritual growth. The course releases in November, but if you join the wait list, you'll get an exclusive access to an upcoming free live training and a one-time only discounted launch price. So join the wait list now at typologyinstitute.com/waitlist. That's typologyinstitute.com/waitlist. We have a great guest today, John Driver. He is an award-winning writer and collaborator of more than 25 books, a former history teacher from University of Tennessee. And his newest project is Not So Black and White, an invitation to honest conversations about race and faith. So we cover a lot of ground in this podcast. I know you're going to enjoy it. That's it for me, Anthony Skinner. And now, without any further ado, here is the host you've been waiting for, Ian Cron.
John Driver, Counterphobic 6, author of the new book, Not So Black and White, Invitation to Honest Conversation about Race and Faith. Welcome to Typology.
So glad to be here.
Man, we are pumped. This is going to be a rich conversation. So you are familiar with the Enneagram, and I want to know a little bit about your journey with it.
Okay. Well, I was highly resistant. And it was my wife that brought me along. There's this phenomenon in my life that she's always right. And I know that sounds cliche, but in my case, I don't think it's true for everyone, but in my case, it really is true. It's amazing and infuriating. But she began reading up on the Enneagram, and she's a 2. And she began to tell me, oh, you should take a look at this. And I did all of the classic resistances that, I'm no expert, but what I've read, there's a lot of resistances of, well, you can't put me in a box. I'm a pastor and a writer, so I feel like I'm pretty in touch. We're a very feelings-centered family. A lot of articulation and expression of what we're thinking, and kind of thought I knew who I was on the inside, and man, was I wrong. There was so much. In fact, I've also been through a 12-step recovery journey in the last 5 years, in addition to the Enneagram. And I remember I listened to a podcast and about counterphobic 6s that she asked me to listen to. And I came in, I was mowing the yard, and I was like, oh my goodness, this absolutely is me. And it just began a journey. And your podcast is one of the first things I listened to. In fact, in your book was the first book I read on the Enneagram. And it was illuminating. And not just in what was going on in me, but to begin to see the people around me differently as well, and to begin to explore my marriage and, of course, my ministry. And I think just expounding that idea that people are not all, good or bad, or introverts and extroverts, but there's a whole lot more nuance and layers to what's going on inside of people. And it's, I have so far to go, but it's a journey that I'm on and excited to be on, because it's illuminated things I really needed to see and I just couldn't see.
So what role did anxiety play in your resistance?
Well, as a counterphobic, the thing I was most, insulted by was the idea that I was motivated by fear. It was truly, because I consider myself a very courageous person. In fact, we laugh, I think, that I grew up a 3 because I lived, and I was the student council president and the full ride to college and just accomplish at every turn. And we laugh because my wife in her 3 wing, I felt like 2 3s got married, in their early 20s is what it sort of feels like, because we were living in those places of life because she's quite accomplished. And so because I'd always, I always strived to overcome that fear. In fact, that was probably the main thing that held me back. And she was like, yeah, I read it, you're motivated by fear, and obviously anxiety. Fear, I think how you say it is something like, fear is an active danger. Anxiety is just forecasting the danger. And in some way it could happen. Never thought of myself. Everyone thought I was a super positive guy. And so when I would read some of those lists and it would say, oh, you're constantly thinking of what could go wrong, that didn't resonate at first with me. But I think in your 30s and 40s, you begin to have maybe a more clear viewpoint of really what motivates you, not just what your behavior is. And I began to see it played a huge role, that I've constantly lived my life trying to put boundaries around all that could go wrong, and not just for me, but for people around me, especially. And the loyalist side of that fit like a glove. I mean, all that made perfect sense. But when I really began to understand the fear side, it's to this day opening up things that I'm still working on. Like, it shows me where to invite something higher than me into my life, because I'm not able to do enough prep. I'm not able to do enough in my life to stop all of those things, and I'm out of control. And so when I embraced that fear was motivation, I lost control. And it was all an illusion anyway. I didn't actually have it, but that's what I thought I had all of these years, because all the trappings around me and all the good works and all the accomplishments, were for security. That's what I was really going for.
Interesting. So just to kind of take a sideways step, we're both in 12-step recovery, right? Me for drug and alcohol addiction. Don't need to reveal to us what yours is. But the question I have for you is, fear plays such a role in the life of addicts. Like there's a bunch of sections of the big book, man. It's all about the role of fear, the role of resentment, right? But fear plays a really big part. In fact, Anthony, just the other day, I was driving right down here, down 9th Avenue, and I said to myself, because I was going through something with somebody, and I just had this feeling. I was like, I am so tired of being afraid. Like just going through life afraid. But for different reasons than a 6 would, right? For different reasons. But, fear runs through the lives of lots of addicts. And I'm wondering what connection, if any, you've made between recovery and your Enneagram type. Like, how has it helped you? Or, like, have you thought about that relationship?
Absolutely.
Yeah, tell folks about it.
Yeah, I think the Enneagram showed me that I was wrong about who I thought I was. And that was really good news. That I didn't need to be insulted or insecure about the idea that what I thought I knew about myself, it's not that it was all a lie. I knew elements of it. And I think getting into motivations versus behaviors, because again, I'm a 3rd generation pastor. So a wonderful father, grandfather, but the traditions that, I think I was not even just raised in, but it's less about someone telling me this in my home and more about the environments that we run in. They really do focus on what you do. And the Enneagram brought me to a place of, and that affects how I see God and all kinds of things. So for my whole life, I can theologically exegete about grace and all these things. But in my heart of hearts, I really feel like God doesn't like me that much. I mean, I wouldn't he likes others, but, there was that, and I'm not afraid to say what I'm in recovery for. I'm a recovering Pharisee in every way, not the kind that you think of who just sits around and judges everybody harshly, more the kind who felt that what God could offer me was not quite enough. Like he needed me to add to it with the accomplishment and with being good enough, which is equally Phariseeism in terms of like always not being enough, not resting in grace, not resting and trusting that it's okay. And again, it's almost like, if, in Christian terms, grace is enough for heaven, but the rest on earth is up to me. And so love is what God has to do for me, but he doesn't like me very well unless I perform. And so, and being a father, that I see that's not how it is. And so the Enneagram really, to answer your question, illuminated, I think, a lot of faulty thinking towards myself. It also got me outside of the idea that looking inward was somehow narcissism, or, there's a lot of movements in the Christian world of stop looking in so much and look out. And I realized, there's a lot of rooms inside of me I've never invited my faith into because I didn't know they existed. So the Enneagram was like a key to that door. And then when I got into recovery, specifically, by the time I got to step 4, into inventory, which is the hardest step, and which lots of people in the Christian world reject that step. When you begin to, I was a youth pastor for 15 years, and we had a really large youth ministry. Lots of kids came through, and we were very relational, very active, taking them all over the world. And when that season ended, and I did 50 weddings after that, it was just a constant thing. But I'm reevaluating all the things that I taught them, things I didn't know to teach them that I'm learning now. And when I begin to, in my inventory or in my confession, even as a pastor, and I do this a lot, say, hey, I fear maybe that inadvertently you guys might have been more secure in the love of Pastor John than you were in God. Because as much as I told you about his love, I stayed in motion. I was the guy always performing, and lots of kids, I think, felt that need to live up to that as again, to gain God's affection. So, but when I begin that confession, there's almost always oh, you didn't mean anything by it. Oh, don't be so hard on yourself. Oh, you've been forgiven. And they don't realize they're rejecting a confession because, well, one, they're involved in that story. And if you take off, and I got to be careful, I don't want to remove the rose-colored hue of childhood from people.
Right.
Like, hey, it was good, it wasn't all bad, all those things. But in the end of the day, they assume I'm feeling condemned by confessing the things of my past, and that's what steps 1, 2, and 3 did. And the Enneagram again unlocks this idea to go, hey, I'm not condemned. This is okay to look at these things. And now I'm dealing with them so I can understand my patterns, and I can understand where I've come from and how I've looked at the world, how I've seen my story in the past. And it's okay. Like it's just okay. It removes that stigma and that condemnation from it to say it's all right to look there so that I can move forward differently.
You can't move forward unless you go into the shadow.
I agree.
There is absolutely no way. And what's ironic is that who's waiting for us in the shadow? Right?
Yeah.
God is has been waiting for us in the shadow. And that doesn't mean that the work isn't difficult. It's just not lonely if it's done correctly, right? Hey, Typology Tribe. I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for helping us bring you what I hope is great content every week. Now, you all know I'm a big proponent of counseling. Whether you feel like something is interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving certain goals, counseling is a great tool to help identify what those blocks are and then work through them. Yet finding a therapist can sometimes feel intimidating, but not with BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers online counseling at your own time and your own pace. You can schedule secure video or phone sessions plus text and chat with your therapist when it's convenient for you. These are licensed professional counselors who specialize in things like depression, anxiety, stress, relationships, LGBT matters, trauma, and grief. BetterHelp has counselors available worldwide and have over 3,000 U.S. licensed therapists across all 50 states. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they are recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. And get this, if you're not satisfied with your counselor for any reason, you can request a new one at any time. at no additional cost. Best of all, it's a truly affordable option. I want you to start living a happier life today. As a listener, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/typologypodcast. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/typologypodcast. TYPOLOGYPODCAST. Last night, Anthony, I went to a lecture on spirituality and recovery. And one of the people said something really stuck with me. They turned to the audience and they said something like, God is still interested in you. And it kind of threw me back, right? That God is still, like God, I think sadly, so many people, whether they're conscious of it or not, have kind of given up on themselves. You know what I mean? It's like, man, I've been stuck in these patterns for so long. I've done everything I know how to get myself out of them. But the truth of the matter is I've basically given up on myself. And the idea that God is still interested in you is kind of moving, right? It's rather affecting,
I think that some of the Christians who may not consider themselves addicts, quote unquote, and there's all that stigma around recovery even, I always tell my friends, my sin of pride and even my fear of not trusting God is on the list of things that he hates. And my friends who are drug addicts, yours is not even on his list in terms. It didn't make it.
Jesus never mentioned coke.
But we reverse that stigma. It's okay. Right. It's okay.
Totally.
These are acceptable things. Yeah. These are normal. And to your point, I think that we're just as enslaved as believers often by that very thing. I don't feel that my father or my shepherd is as motivated about my recovery or my redemption as I am. So it's all up to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that was what changed for me when I felt pursued. These ideas of, they sound so like a worship song, so we don't want to do them. That we put them in cliche places. But when it really became, and I have to challenge myself, I have to read these daily sort of declarations I write to myself every day because I default. Every morning it seems like I wake up, I don't disbelieve in God anymore, but I go back to the pattern of, this is going to be up to me today. Mm-hmm. And he must be a little disappointed unless I pray enough or do this enough. And I have to be reminded, before I ever woke up, he was way more interested in my safety. And when I put my daughter to bed at night, and when she's been scared in her life, I'll say, listen, it is my job to worry about your safety tonight. I've already wired all the windows. I have weapons in the house. I've locked all the doors. And trust me, if you're worried about it, I'm 10 times more prepared for what you're worried. So you can rest. And taking that and realizing, that's really what God, it's not just a sermon. That's really what God feels over me. And I think asking yourself if you really believe that, what will be the life in Christ? That's the journey of the disciple. It's not just resisting all of the temptations and making sure you don't take certain substances and making sure you say the right things and making sure you go to church. The hard life in Christ is really believing the gospel, because it's that radical of, hey, I'm actually pursued. So I spend my days now. That's the challenge. It's no longer just resisting all the bad, but do I really believe in the grace that's that radical?
Yeah. Someone once asked me on a podcast to reduce the gospel down to a phrase or a sentence. And I just said, you are loved.
Yeah.
I took more heat for that than I would care to tell you about, on Twitter and not Instagram, but, Facebook. It's there was all the, I said, and everything. Oh, and I know what I did. I said, you are loved and everything else is editorial. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I got, it's almost like it disappointed people.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, man, I'm sorry, but, I think my view is at least largely correct.
Right.
But, however people want to run with it, that's fine. So, it's interesting that a lot of counterphobic sixes do have trouble self-identifying as counterphobic sixes in the beginning, because their tendency is to think they're eights, right? Because there's all this power and this go up against power and energy. It's this, it's aggression, right? The difference is that for the counterphobic six, they don't know they're afraid. The 8 isn't afraid.
Right.
The counterphobic 6 doesn't know that what's motivating the aggression is fear, right? So talk to me about that dynamic. Like, how did you figure it out, right? That, like, was there a moment you went, it's fear, it's anxiety?
Well, I think, and that's an interesting question to pinpoint the moment. One is just confession. You guys said this light would bring out our souls. So when I discovered that there was a counterphobic 6, it gave me a less shameful way to identify. Because counterphobic sounds super cool. It's like, oh my gosh, I attack what makes me afraid. So I had that. It was still pride, but it was the ability to go, okay, I can accept the fear, because here's the deal: I never let it sit without me going after it with punch. So it had that same sort of aggression,
right?
Towards the fear, though, I knew what it was. If I look back over my life, absolutely fear has been a motivating factor. Certainly in people pleasing, another thing I'm in recovery for, that need for the approval, that I don't know how that ever completely goes away, but it has to be put into the right place. When I began to identify that, not just as, everyone thinks of me as a peacemaker, and I have no enemies. Like there was a day in life, I guess I really have no enemies because I need resolution instantaneously if there's a problem. And some of that was really good. Taking some good things from Scripture and, applying them, like, hey, I do not go to bed angry with anybody. Like, it was a constant peacemaking. Since I've become healthier, I probably do have people who consider me their enemy, though I don't like that, because I have become stronger in saying, hey, this is what I think we need to do. I can lead a little stronger in that, and I can be at peace with everyone not being at peace with me a little more.
Yeah.
But I think that was it. It was the moment where I realized, okay, what you're doing all this time is fighting against a pattern of fear, whether it's with people in ministry, whether it's with even my wife. Coming to a realization, I think in the triads especially, that I'm a head and she's a heart, and how I needed instantaneous resolution. I'm the kind of guy, and it drives her crazy. I'm the kind of guy that we can be in, and we don't have a lot of big fights, but we've been married 21 years this month. And at times, if we're super animated, we're both very, what's the word here, articulate, or stubborn, able to argue our case. Neither one of us loses unless it's on purpose. Right. We could have kept going. And I'm the kind of guy, though, if in the middle of this heated moment, if she can make a logical point that shows me where I'm wrong, and this is how another way I knew this about me, immediately I repent and I'm fine. And I go, oh yeah, well, crap. No, you're right. I'm so sorry. And I go from 100 down to 0. And she's like, hey, I don't downshift quite that fast. 'Cause you just said a whole lot of hurtful things. But for me, it was like, so in understanding that she feels first and logic comes second. It takes her time to put an articulation mentally to the things that she's feeling. So it really began to, it repeatedly, because I often thought, am I 3 because of that achievement? Sort of, I still have that. I still want to accomplish. And the 8, I think for me, I do fight against the things that I feel like are unjust, but I'm super loyal if a system, especially if a system or a person seems safe, and that's the word I have to put with it. If they seem safe and that they're in the right spot with their ideology, their leadership, their heart's in the right place, if I perceive that, it's really hard to get rid of me. I've been at the same church for 18 years now.
Right.
In
super 6 though. Yeah. And the danger is, right, for an unhealthy 6, particularly counterphobic 6s, is because they're not very aware around their anxiety, they will blindly follow someone who promises safety. And we've seen a pattern of this in recent years, right? Or even in just, across the political spectrum. Everything's about fear. And of course, what does that do? Well, it corrals people into groupthink. And then they corral into what we might call epistemic cocoons, right? They're just locked into this silo where everyone's just massaging each other's pre-existing biases and beliefs. Nothing else is allowed to get in. And, I hate to say it, but 6s are particularly vulnerable to this because anxiety, whether they're phobic or counterphobic, is so prevalent that the moment someone says, I can keep you safe, the very unhealthy 6 will follow them in a trance-like way right off the cliff, and actually be defending craziness, crazy behavior all the way off the cliff because they have tethered their security to that person. And the anxiety it would cause them to realize that person isn't safe is too much. Right? So again, people, I think that when you have that awareness, you can begin to live with more critical thinking, right? But man, nothing motivates the human person like fear.
It's interesting earlier when you were talking, I was reminded of this. It's something that Sarah the Barge said that was on our show, and she is a hardcore 6. And you said, I couldn't identify with the fear because I considered myself a courageous person. And she said that a lot of her friends would always call her brave, and she makes this distinction. She says, I'm not brave because bravery is the ability to confront danger without feeling fear, and courage is acting in the face of danger in spite of the fear. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think that's...
The presence of courage doesn't mean you're not afraid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Just watch Lord of the Rings. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of a wonderful illustration of that idea. Hey everyone, our kids are grown up, but let me tell you about something I wish I'd had when they were kids. It's called KiwiCo. KiwiCo creates accessible, hands-on projects for kids of all ages designed to make learning about STEAM, that's science, technology, engineering, art, and math, they make it fun. Each crate is designed by experts and tested by kids, offering fun opportunities to learn and explore at home. Delivered monthly, each box comes with all the supplies you need for that month's project, meaning no extra runs to the store. And now, as we switch from summer to fall with kids' minds turning to baking and Halloween and spending more time inside, what better time to foster their natural creative thinking and channel it into hands-on fun? With a new crate each month, kids can discover the science of magic, engineer a domino machine, and more. My assistant Wendy, for example, has 2 young boys, 8 and 10, and they were so excited to get their Tinker Crate and explore the science of slime. They love slime. I love slime. And their favorite part was getting to create it themselves. With KiwiCo's hands-on art and science projects, kids will learn new skills, build new experiences, and make connections to the broader world, all while you spend more quality time together tackling projects. So, scare up some fun this Halloween with KiwiCo. Redefine learning with play. Explore hands-on projects that build confidence, creativity, and critical thinking skills. And get 50% off your first month plus free shipping on any crate line with this code, Typology, Typology, at KiwiCo.com. That's right, folks, 50% off your first month at KIWICO.com. Use the promo code Typology. All right, you've written a new book, Not So Black and White, Invitation to Honest Conversation About Race and Faith. This is an example of a counterphobic 6 conquering fear and running into a conversation that is frightening, is intimidating, is controversial, and difficult, and particularly particularly in the world of faith, right? In the contemporary world, you'd think that people would do a better job of actually wanting to engage the topic rather than finding a tribe and siloing off, right? So tell me about the book. Tell me how it came to be, and how you think being a counterphobic 6 inspired you or helped you or hindered you in the process of writing it.
So when you look at authority, people in my life who, you talk about ascribing to a person or to a tribe that makes you feel safe, I think maybe the counterphobic part of me actually causes me to constantly test them, reevaluate them, and hold them to a standard. I look for all, that's the other part of my 6, is that I look for all the things that could be, and I value logic and I value honesty. So this is an issue. What's so crazy about it is, before recovery, there's no way I'd write this book. Before the Enneagram and looking inside, there's no way 10 years ago I'd write this book. I always consider myself, I'm a history major, and my graduate degree was in curriculum and instruction, so I was a history teacher in public school, and went to a public university, went to the University of Tennessee, so didn't do the traditional seminary path, end up in ministry, end up as a writer, and I always, because of that history knowledge, considered myself someone who hates racism. And I would teach, against it and in terms of our history. And so I think that would have created for me, before recovery principles, before a little more introspection and honesty with myself, it would have created what a lot of people are feeling today. And that's this almost false shroud of who I perceive myself to be versus what I'm actually doing in this space. So if you would have asked me, absolutely, I'm not a racist. And then the number one thing we talk about in this book is as a pastor and people I talk to, they're like, I'm just so sick of everyone calling me a racist in this conversation. And sometimes I'll ask them, like, hey, who actually called you a racist? Can you name them? Well, and they usually can't. Usually someone in their tribe is telling them that you're being called a racist. If you engage any sort of social justice issue, we've been dubbed woke. Now we've been dubbed liberal. You drop liberal, it is a conversation ender because of the fear. And now socialist or social Marxist or all these things. And we just kind of, for me, there's, again, everything is broken down logically for me. And when the gospel became clear to me, I have a long ways to go, but there was clearly a disposition to a disciple that's evident in Scripture. And when I began to see, even as a pastor, when our church was much larger and we were way more program-based and works-based, we had a lot more people. Our church right now is a lot smaller, and we've lost people over this.
Oh, I bet you have.
Yeah. And not only on this. Maybe I just suck as a pastor, and that's okay. I'm at peace with that, But the level of life change in more of a recovery-based place where those principles are being taught week in, week out, the level of life change is 400% more in the number of people we have of who's really experiencing freedom from things in their life that have always held them, and who's really confident in their relationship with Christ. And so basically this book is just an application of those principles to the things that we're all facing right now. And it's with my good friend Reggie Dabbs. Reggie and I have written 2 other books together. He's the #1 public school speaker in the world. Reggie he travels 300 days a year for the past 30 years. He's the most famous guy that you maybe have never heard of because he's always in a public school somewhere. But every major conference you can imagine, he's, a speaker at. And when George Floyd, the video came out, I was sitting in the bed with my wife, and we had been talking through some things over the course of time. And that's when it all came to a head for me of who I thought I was versus what I was really doing, what I was really speaking into the space. And I cried when he called out for his mama. I cried. And I understand everyone won't connect that moment to race, but again, I was beginning to think more on a systemic level than just individual responsibility. What is my responsibility here? What can I be blamed for or not blamed for? I realized the truth is I've been worried all this time about not doing something wrong, but I'm doing nothing at all. I'm just a guy on the sideline. And so I immediately ordered about 10 books and began reading Black authors who I should have been reading the whole time. And then the next day I called my friend Reggie, and we've been friends for so long, written 2 books together, shared stages together. And I said, Reg, can I ask you some questions? And he was like, yeah. I mean, he's not his job to educate all the white people of the world. Like I said, all the caveats. I was like, man, what's it like to be a black man in America? I've never asked you. And I thought he'd hesitate. And he said, when my son was learning how to drive, the first thing I taught him was to take his wallet out, put it in the seat next to him. If he gets pulled over, to roll down all 4 windows, turn on the dome light, and put his hands at 10 and 2 in the wheel. He said, I taught him that before I taught him to put on his seatbelt. And it was like much like everything in the Enneagram or anything else, it was like, oh my goodness, I've been missing this whole time. That his experience, if nothing else, whatever we take away from that, we don't indict all police as bad apples and all the things. That's really not what this is about. If nothing else, my friend has had a different experience in America. I've been right next to him the whole time, and that was not his only story, or other people we interviewed for the book that I have never asked. And he said, John, what we really need is white leaders, pastors, not cheering us from the sidelines on this. And Reggie's never really spoken out about race. And he says in the book, I'm the first guy that asked him. I was the first guy. And that's not some look at, that's tragic. That shouldn't be like I'm not saying that to elevate myself in that, but just listening to his story. And so we began a journey, not necessarily knowing it's going to lead to a book. And every chapter opens up with conversations we had, real conversations and dialogue. And basically, we overlay recovery principles to this topic. And it gets all the way into white nationalism and where we are in our current political climate. But it's more about, and there's a big question we ask, when was the last time you changed your mind about anything? Mm-hmm. Can you think of a time you changed your mind about anything? I mean, a menu order, anything at all. And if like your life is characterized by thinking that not having ever a changed mind is a good thing, then you're missing the literal definition in the Greek of the word repentance, which is the turning of one's mind. And we begin to just sort of unravel what those things are in an invitational way. And I tell my own journey through pride and being a Pharisee and all these things. And Reggie tells his story. So it's a lot of just sharing and inviting. And the whole idea is, hey, when we get to step 4, what we say is that this nation is taking an inventory on race right now. And many people in the church, myself included in my past, we're standing on the sidelines throwing rocks at this. We're not engaging in this because we're too insulted by the idea that we might be indicted as wrong. But the entire gospel begins with the good news that I'm wrong. Like, that's actually great news. So we kind of go, what do we really believe about this gospel thing that we're spending so much time talking about? And that's what recovery and that's what Enneagram did for me, is go, oh, it's okay that I'm broken. That's actually been the case the whole time. I was fooling myself. I'm actually more free when I invite God into the broken places, especially when I can name them and I can understand them. So it's a different journey. And that caused my eyes to be open to go, hey, maybe I'm broken here. I'm way worse than a racist. If whatever term we're going to use, like, I'm way worse than that. That's okay. I've already admitted that. Now, what am I missing? What kind of listen? So the inventory we take is we go deep. That history teacher comes out. We go deep into American history and church history all the way up to present with the understanding that hopefully the first couple chapters have been like steps 1, 2, and 3. A little bit for where we are. Here's where we get insulted. Here's the hot button terms. What do we really believe about this gospel thing? And we may not be able to end racism in the world, but we should believe that Christ does not want it among his people. And if we hear this from white Christians a lot, like, oh, it's always going to be here. Racism is always going to be around. And we're going, guys, that's a pretty non-heroic view of what Christ wants to do. We wouldn't tolerate a lot of other things among us, but maybe we can move forward with this and see a change among God's people, and maybe that will spread to others as well.
Hey everybody, one of the lessons I've learned over the years is that not everybody benefits from a traditional 50-minute counseling session. And this is why some people can go to couples therapy or personal counseling for a long time and never really get anywhere. This is why I'm such a believer of intensive counseling and my friends at Restoring the Soul in Colorado, created by my longtime friend Michael Cusick to help couples or individuals experience deep change and half-day blocks over 1 or 2 weeks. Now listen, if you can't wait months or years to get to the bottom of an issue or to experience breakthrough, you need to get in touch with my friend Michael and his extraordinary team of counselors at Restoring the Soul. If you're looking to get out of the rut you're in, but can't wait months or years, call Restoring the Soul today for a free consultation with Michael's staff. Call 303-932-9777 and learn how their intensive counseling process can help you. As a special bonus, just for Typology listeners, make sure to visit www.restoringthesoul.com/typology to download their PDF called 5 Ways Unaddressed Trauma May Be Derailing Your Relationships. So here's a question I've actually thought a lot about. And I don't want to assign, as I think some people do, too much weight of wisdom to the Enneagram, right? Like it's just a tool, man. It's like, it doesn't decode the deepest mystery of the human soul or anything else like that. I'm always trying to talk people off of that ledge. But I have wondered to myself how the Enneagram could inform and help the conversation between Black and white people around the issue of racism, if it has anything to say at all. I mean, I don't want to say I have an answer, but what do you think? Because you're more schooled in it than I am.
Well, I don't know. When we were writing, and we say this kind of in our introduction, and this is a hard maybe pill to swallow, but we're writing to Black and white Christians and to anyone who wants to read. But we make it plain like, hey, it's going to be white Christians' issues we're going to deal with more, because our assumption is a lot of our Black brothers and sisters are already at this table waiting for us to join them. So we're going to try to unravel a lot of things that we see in our own experiences. So I don't know, for me, I never feel comfortable saying what someone else, I mean, again, it's a tall order to tell someone else to be humble, for example. If I'm not being that in myself, then, I have to always look at what is happening to me. So I think what we can say is for the individual, and yes, I believe, to answer your question, it would work no matter, regardless of your ethnicity, but it could be a distraction for a lot. I think that a lot of people use any excuse to not engage, especially a topic like this, especially when we're all right now so full of anxiety over a lot of other things. It's like, man, I just want to break from this. And I would encourage people with that this has been more liberating than it has been heavy, to go, finally, we did an interview the other day, and the guy said, this is a minefield for me as a white guy. Like, I'm grateful you've given us a path, to at least try to start walking this, because it's the same reason you don't go to recovery. You don't go to recovery until it's bad enough or until you recognize your brokenness and you want to change. Everybody needs it. It's not a question of who needs it. It's just, again, it's another tool. Like you said, it's not a thing. It's not a magic pill. I mean, it's just another way to, understand the tools that are offered to you. So, but yeah, I think it could make a difference, but I just think everyone has to think about where it starts with themselves.
So I had an experience once that was interesting. I was leading a conference, and we had people break out into sort of dyads, 2 people talking with each other. And there was a Black man, I'd say in his 50s, and a younger white man, maybe in his late 20s, right? And they were both 2s on the Enneagram, okay? And they began talking to each other about their life experience as 2s. Right? Now, at the end of the conference, what was so interesting is that this younger white guy was from a very small town in Arkansas. Now, and self-admittedly grew up in a racist, kind of environment, right? And he said, what was so powerful today was beyond the conversation of race. I finally understood that he and I had more in common as 2s on the Enneagram than we didn't as a Black and a white man. Now, I'm not saying that the issue of race wasn't terribly important in that context, but the insight was kind of revelatory for me. Like, for them to talk about their inner terrain and to see the similarities between each other would have been an interesting exercise prior to a conversation perhaps around race. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, it's like, oh, wait a minute. You see the world through the same lens that I do. You experience life in similar ways to the way that I do. And I'm not saying that levels the playing field or that,
Sure.
In some Pollyannish way, kind of eliminates the problems of systemic racism. But what I am saying was it as an exercise, it helped them to see each other more deeply beyond what people tend to get boxed into. Yeah. Does that make sense? And that was how I thought, maybe the Enneagram is sort of in a little way, perhaps helpful in possibly in that conversation.
Oh, I think any tool, it creates a common point of origin for the conversation. It's going to go different places, but they can at least come together. The argument against the conversation on race at all in the Christian world is, we're all one race and this divides and this distracts and all those things, which someone just posted a comment on one of our YouTube videos of that, which is the exact thing we go through over and over again in the book to deal with. Yes, there is one race, human race, and many ethnicities and all those things, but it's a smokescreen to not deal with listening often. That's what it was probably for me in my early days of this. Finding the common points of origin, for me, whether it was the Enneagram or not, because Reggie, my co-author, he's a 9, and he just discovered that. I made him take a test, and it wasn't necessarily who we were on the Enneagram. Again, that's just the tool, but we found the common point, and it was in our friendship and in our experiences to start somewhere. And I think the Enneagram could be a beautiful place for that, especially when you see the world in a unique way that you thought was completely yours. And you find out, there are others who have a similar uniqueness. And, that could be a great way to build relationships. And that's what we're all about. We need to be building relationships. We're not stopping to divide ourselves among race. The whole point is the unity, but without an inventory, and without looking back, without saying, this is where I haven't seen this rightly, then I can't move forward. So removing the stinger from the inventory and going, no, this is a good process. And whatever you use, this is a good process. Let's go through it so that the other side can look different.
Well, I love that a loyalist has written a book about race in America, in the church, right? The challenges that face us and the opportunities that face us as well. So thank you so much for writing it, and putting it out into the world as an important part of the ongoing conversation that needs to be had, right? Needs to be had. I'm joined by John Driver, author of Not So Black and White, or I should say co-author of Not So Black and White, Invitations to Honest Conversations About Race and Faith. It's been rich, man. Been rich. And I've learned a lot more about 6s today and the gift that they bring. I don't think I've ever met a 6 writer yet. Yeah, not that I know of. I mean a lot of 1s. I meet a good number of 3s. Oh my gosh, I meet a lot of 3s. 4s write a particular style which is a little bit different. But anyway, so I'm really glad to have you here. How do people learn more about what you're doing and how they can follow you?
The website for the book, I would need to say this, notsoblackandwhitebook.com.
Right.
So make sure you put the book in, notsoblackandwhitebook.com. And we're excited about that. You can check it out and begin reading on that site. And there's some videos there and different ways to engage this conversation.
Fantastic. Hey, Typology Tribe, remember these words. May you have love. May you have joy. May you have peace. May you have healing. May you have rest. Until next time.